Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And the church says, what a blessing to be with you today. There was a bracelet years ago that people wore, and it was kind of popular, and it was WWJD, right? What would Jesus do? Y'all probably remember that. They were all over the place. People wore them, and and they got them at church camps and VBSs, and they were handed out everywhere. And I was thinking about that a little bit this week with the things that are going on, a lot of the posts that so things that were upset. And I started to think about, that's really not the way we should look at it. What would Jesus do? Because that's subjective. When I think that, I'm thinking, what do I think Jesus would do? How do I think Jesus would handle this situation? And that's kind of a subjective way to look at it. I thought, really what we should be asking ourselves, what did Jesus do? What did he do? How did he live? How did he react with people? Was he always the kind-hearted and good guy? Did he, what about his anger? What about his sadness? What about his tears? What about the things that he wanted to project to a world that really didn't want to hear what he had to say? Jesus walked in a very divisive world. Jim prayed in his prayer, we live in a troubled time. Well, the world's always been troubled. Tell me a time in history when it's not a troubled time. I mean, it's always been that way, right? I guess it will be that way until the end of time. I mean, let's face it, when Cain killed Abel, it all started, right? I mean, that's the beginning of our recorded history. And what's one of the very first things we know? Somebody killed somebody. And the truth is, it hasn't changed much over thousands of years. People still kill people. People still go to war. People still fight. People still hate. Nations rise and nations fall, and kings come and kings go, and powers come and powers go, and governments fall. He's sitting here talking about Bill's teaching Revelation. A lot of us think Revelation's about the fall of the Roman Empire. There's some differences of opinion about that, but the truth is that Rome did fall. Rome was a great empire. Rome controlled the known world at the time of Jesus, and Rome collapsed. Rome collapsed. And, it's one of those things, right? How many great nations have collapsed? When the Byzantine Empire fell to the Ottomans, and it wasn't long, World War I came along, and the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist. At the time of Jesus, right before Jesus, the Hasmonean dynasty, we call it, was in control of Judea, Jerusalem, and they had taken that over because of the Maccabean revolt. Because Jerusalem was under siege, and Jerusalem was in a terrible state, and the Maccabeans revolted, and that Maccabean family took control of that area, Judea, and they called that the Hasmonean dynasty. But you know what? It wasn't long before in that Hasmonean dynasty, there's another nation came along. The Romans came along, and the Romans came in, and then all of a sudden you had Herod the Great. And Herod the Great was not that great. Right? Because Herod the Great caused a lot of problems, and Herod the Great killed a lot of people, and Herod the Great's the one who killed all the babies in Bethlehem when Jesus was born because he was scared of that, and Jesus had to flee to Egypt, and Jesus grew up as a fugitive of his own land. About that, we don't think about that with Jesus. Jesus was a refugee. Jesus had to flee the land that he was born in because of a king that was going to kill him. Jesus was a refugee who fled to a foreign country, to Egypt, until such a time as he could come back to his country, to Nazareth, where he was raised up. Jesus was raised in a family that was Jewish, that fled because of an evil empire and an evil king, fled to another land. And when Jesus was raised up, what did his parents talk about? You think his parents fuzzy feelings about Rome? Do you think his parents said, oh, Rome's a great empire. The Caesar's a great guy, right? It's all good. That Herod family, that Herodian dynasty, them guys, they're wonderful. You think that's what Jesus heard growing up? Do you think Jesus heard good things about that country that he lived in, about the people who ruled it? If you grow up and you hear these things, and you see these things, and Jesus saw the cruelty of Rome. Jesus saw people that were crucified on the side of the road. Jesus saw people who were forced to go the extra mile with a soldier, who were probably beat or raped or tortured by Roman soldiers who basically acted on their own initiative. They were taxed excessively by Rome. They hated the tax collectors because they were corrupt. We're in a corrupt system, in a corrupt world. Jesus grew up in that. Jesus should have grown up hating them. He should have grown up despising them. He should have grown up wanting to get rid of them. But did Jesus? You know, they came, didn't they? Romans tells us this in Romans 8. Paul says, those whom he predestined, those who he foreknew, he predestined to become conformed to the image of Christ. That's you and me. I don't know what my mission is in this life specifically, but I know one thing. The mission in my life is to look like Jesus Christ. I'm not going to say that I'm there, and I might never be there. But the mission of my life is to look like Jesus. And if I'm going to look like him, I'm going to act like him, I'm going to speak like him, then I need to know what he did. I need to know how he lived. I need to know what was important to him and how he reacted to the controversy that surrounded his life, because I have a lot of controversy within my life. And I have to know how Jesus responded to that, so Rex knows how to respond to that. Because if I'm really going to be conformed to him, really going to look like him, really going to act like him, I need to know him. And I don't have any miraculous knowledge of Jesus. What I know about Jesus, I know because I read it. There's no miraculous knowledge. I don't have any miraculous knowledge to give you. I read the same Bible you read. I read about the same Jesus that you read about. So what do you pull from those pages? What do you pull from that experience? How does it affect your life? How does it change you? How does it make you different than what you would be? You know, they wanted Jesus to be a king, didn't they? They wanted that more than anything because they lived under this rule they hated. They lived under this empire that they hated. They didn't think they should be bound to anybody. They thought they were God's people. God should protect them. God should give them a land. The Old Testament gives them prophecy after prophecy about God restoring Israel, God bringing it back, God conquering these things, God bringing them peace, God bringing them prosperity. When Jesus comes along, that's what they want. And they get this guy, Jesus, that pops onto the scene, and this guy can heal the dead. He can raise the dead. He can heal the sick. He can feed 5,000 people. Right before this story in John 6, boy, John 6, what a chapter, huh? Right before this story in John 6, Jesus feeds 5,000 people. And they see him do this. They're like, you need to be our king. We're going to make you king. Who can defeat your army? If you're our king, who can defeat us? You can raise the dead. You can heal the sick. You can feed 5,000 people with a few fish and a few loaves of bread. What's the hardest thing about winning a war? It's logistics, right? You got that handled. Be our king, and Jesus knew it, and Jesus could have been king, and Jesus could have defeated Rome, and Jesus could have said, boy, I showed you, and I've hated you my whole life, and I grew up hating you, and you caused me to be a refugee, and you killed all the children of Bethlehem, and you've overtaxed us, and you've overdone it, and I've seen your cruelty, and I've seen your oppression, and I'm just going to get rid of you once and for all. Jesus had the power, Jesus had the ability, Jesus had the means and the following to make that happen. And Jesus said, that's not me. Jesus withdrew to be by himself alone. And if you read the conclusion of John chapter 6, you'll see as we go through John 6, at the end of it, Jesus actually makes them mad and most of them leave. Jesus realized his popularity has become a hindrance to him and not a help, because he's not going to be that earthly king, nor did he ever intend to be that earthly king. And so two groups of people come to Jesus. You know, the Jews were divided, just like everybody in the world's divided. They weren't just like one unified thing. There were sects of the Jews at the time of Jesus. You read about it. There were Pharisees, there were Sadducees, there's the Essenes, who we really don't read about. They were like a nomadic cult. There were the Zealots. Jesus, one of his disciples, one of his apostles, was a zealot. And I've often wondered how those conversations went around the campfire when you had a zealot in the crowd. I think it would have been interesting. Wish we could have heard some of them conversations, because they wanted to overthrow Rome. They wanted to use military power, and eventually they would try that, and it would end miserably, and Rome and Jerusalem would be destroyed in 71 AD because the Zealots wanted to overthrow it. And Jesus grew up in this Jewish climate that was divided, and so two groups of these divided Jews. One group of these divided Jews, the Herodians, who were Jews who thought it was okay to be a Roman and wanted to pay tax to Rome and thought that's what they should do. They should support the Roman Empire, support that system. They were Jewish, but they thought, hey, it's pretty good. You know, we got a lot of protection. Things are all right. Need to stay with the to support Rome. And then there was this other group, right? The Pharisees, These Herodians that came were Jewish, except Jesus in a trap. Can't say the right thing here. On one hand, if he says we need to support Rome, the Herodians would be like, oh yeah, that's what we've been saying all along, listen to him. And the other people would say, oh no, we hate Rome, we don't want Rome, you're siding with this evil empire and you shouldn't do that, and there's all kinds of reasons we can give you why you shouldn't side with Rome. So they brought Jesus in this corner, and Jesus gets asked a question on a poll tax. You know what a poll tax is? A poll tax is a straight tax on everybody. You know, in our country, we tax according to income, right? Supposedly. We tax everybody, but nevertheless, another subject. In our country, we tax according to income. A poll tax means everybody paid the same tax. Whether you was poor, dirt poor, or wealthy, you each paid the same tax. Wasn't very fair, was it? Because the poor guy that didn't have any money, he had to pay the same tax as the guy who had a whole lot of money. Poll tax was not a very fair tax, and tax collectors are very corrupt, we hear, at this time in history. So they give him a question. They say, is it lawful? Not is it right? You know, in our world, there's three things that govern us. There's law, there's ethics, there's morality. Right? Is it lawful? Does it break the law? That's the first thing we think about. I want to break the law. And then if we get past that, we say, is it ethical? In other words, does the world think that it's wrong? Because that's really what ethics is. Does the world think that it's wrong? And then the other thing is morality. Morality is that thing that God gives us. As a Christian, it's that thing that God puts, it's our compass, our moral compass. But they didn't ask that question. They didn't ask, is it moral or ethical? They said, is it lawful for a Jew to pay tax to an emperor, to Caesar? That's the question. And Jesus, you know the story, Jesus shows the coin. He says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. You know, Jesus didn't get in the middle of it, did he? Because Jesus' mission wasn't to change the government. Jesus' mission wasn't to set up a new regime or a new empire or an earthly kingdom. Jesus' mission was to save the lost. You see, sometimes we get so caught up in our things and our stuff that we forget what we're supposed to be about. I don't always agree with the government, but I'll never preach a political lesson. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican or independent, or it makes no difference to me. I care less. You might not agree with my politics. That's okay. We can agree to disagree. I'm 100% all right with it. My mission is not to change the government, because I've learned something. They're never going to listen to me anyway. I've given up on that a long time ago. At about 17 years old, I finally decided the President of the United States was never going to call Rex up and ask him how to do something. I don't know. It's just never happened. Right? But I can change my family. I can change my friends. I can change my workplace. Why are we so upset about things that we're never going to change? Brethren, kingdoms come and kingdoms go, and nations rise and nations fall, and kings rule and kings die, and God's eternal. You think America's eternal? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think any nation is, any country is, anything is. There's one thing in the world that's eternal. There's one thing on earth that's constant in my life, and that's Jesus Christ and his kingdom. And if America rises or America falls or it ends tomorrow, I still have a kingdom. And I still belong to God. And my kingdom's eternal. I don't want to make you a good American. I'd love to make you a good Christian. You know, I think when Jesus came, Jesus knew that. Jesus had these other group of people, didn't he? These Samaritans. Half-bloods. You know, Syria goes in, conquers Israel, leaves the ones they don't want, intermixes, interbreeds. They worship on Mount Ebal when there's shrines there. Woman at the well, John 4. I didn't put it all up there because you know the story. I did put up a couple of verses. I thought it was important because it shows who Jesus was. You know, Jesus grew up in that Jewish household, and it seems like most Jews really hated the Samaritans. You kind of get that out of the New Testament, don't you? Most Jews really hated the Samaritans. And Jesus rose up in a real Jewish household, and I'm sure his Jewish household wasn't any different than the Jewish household next door. You know, but when Jesus goes purposely through Samaria, instead of going around the wilderness, Jesus sits down with this woman, and it's really interesting what her response. I really wanted you to look at her response. Let's talk about what Jesus says. Listen to what the woman says. The Samaritan woman said, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, since I am a Samaritan woman?" See, Jesus did what nobody expected Jesus to do. Jesus sat down with somebody that he was supposed to hate, he was supposed to despise, and Jesus chose to love her. Jesus chose to listen to her. Jesus didn't condemn her. Jesus didn't throw it in his face. Jesus didn't say, if you don't agree or if you don't worship where I worship, I can't sit here with you, or I can't be your friend, or I can't associate with you anymore. Jesus sat down and he listened to what the woman had to say. And when he listened to that woman, who nobody listened to because of her past, because of her life, because of the things that marked her for who she was, when he listened to that woman, he changed her life. Jesus didn't care if she was, what color she was, what ethnicity she was, whether he was supposed to hate her or not hate her, whether he was supposed to like her or not like her. He didn't ask her affiliation. He knew who she was. Jesus just loved her. And Jesus listened to her. And Jesus changed her life. You want to change somebody's life? You think you're going to do it by giving them an ultimatum? You think you're going to do it by hating them? You think you're going to do it by any of those methods? You're going to change somebody's life by listening to them, by loving them, and by giving them truth and love. Hate is what's wrong with this world, people. Hate is what's wrong with this world. If you don't see that, you're not looking around. And it's not just in this country, it's all over the world. There's wars right now, young men dying right as we speak on battle for a piece of ground that doesn't matter. There's children fleeing, women and men fleeing from the place they were born because it's not safe to live there. As we speak, people are fleeing for their lives. Children are dying as we sit here in this room right now. Hate is changing this world. And you know that, and I know that. But I can't reach over there and fix it. I can pray about it. I can pray about it. I can put it in God's hands. I can't fix the hate that's over there, but I can fix the hate that's in my hometown. I can fix the hate that's in my family, that's in the world that I live in. I can be something different, something better than what's around me if I allow myself to do it. The disciples couldn't believe it. We're amazed that he's been speaking, and they didn't even say a Samaritan, speaking with a woman. And yet no one said, why do you seek, or why do you speak with her? They knew better because they understood, or should have understood, the mission of Jesus was not to divide, but to unite. The mission of Jesus was not to hate, but to love. The mission of Jesus was to bring people together. And I want to tell you about this story and something you think about with this story. But it was in Acts 8 when Philip went to Samaria where Jesus had talked to this woman, and Philip preached the gospel, and those people believed and were baptized and became Christians. And I believe with all my heart that some of those people that Philip preached to said, I remember Jesus being here. You ever thought about that? You ever thought one of them people that Philip baptized might have been that woman? Or that one of her husbands that talked to Jesus at that well? Do you see? Love goes a long ways in the world. People remember it. People might remember hate. People might remember anger. People might remember strife. But I promise you, more than anything, people remember an act of kindness, an act of love. Somebody that reaches down and helps them when nobody else will, or pays attention to them when the world overlooks them or doesn't think that they're good enough to deserve your attention. Jesus understood what you and I should understand. If we do what Jesus did, we look past what this world considers to be what we should do. You know, and then there were the Gentiles. Let's not forget them. You know, I hated those Gentiles. Wouldn't even walk in their house. Wouldn't eat their food. Wouldn't walk in their house. Took their shoes off. Wouldn't even have anything to do with them. Considered them unclean. Right? And then this woman, this Canaanite woman, comes and talks to Jesus. And Jesus, he kind of Gets kind of mean a little, doesn't he? He says, don't you know I was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, right? His disciples, though, look at what they do. You know, we talk about Jesus' apostles, don't we, and how they followed him and who they turned into, but they didn't start there. You know, you look at this story right here. His disciples said, send her away. Right? But the woman fell at his feet and begged him and says, Lord. And he says, it's not right to give the children's bread to the dogs. And the woman says, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And he says, your faith. Jesus didn't turn her away because she was a Gentile. Jesus embraced her. Jesus healed. Jesus did something. Jesus loved. You know, what about these guys? Tax collectors and sinners, right? You know, it's always funny to me, this particular passage of the Bible. It's always funny how they called them sinners. I always sit there and I think, you know, we're all sinners, right? I mean, Paul says we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God, but they didn't look at themselves that way. They looked at themselves as righteous, didn't they? Above it all. Above the fray. We're righteous, right? Look at us. Look at me. Look how good I am. And yet we just looked in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus said, unless your righteousness far exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will in no way enter the kingdom of heaven. Far exceeds. These men who thought they were so perfect, so right, so legalistic, so by the law, by the letter, they forgot what it was like to do it because they loved the Lord. Jesus criticizes you tithe the mint and the dill and the cumin in your cabinets, but you neglect the weightier measure of the law, love and mercy and justice. You should do the former without neglecting the latter, Jesus says. It's not wrong to adhere to the law. What's wrong is to do it for the wrong reasons. Anybody in your life love you? You probably tell me they do. Who would you tell me? Your mother? She kind of has to. I mean, she doesn't have a choice, you know, till she messes up and disowns you, right? You know, your dad, you know, that's kind of one of them relationships, isn't it? Your wife, your husband, do they choose to love you? They fall in love with you? Were they infatuated with you? Did they just, what caused that? Do they love you regardless if you mess up? Do they forgive you if you do wrong? Do they look past your flaws and your imperfections? And do they focus on the things in your life that are true and good and noble? And don't you think that everybody needs to be loved? I do. You know, I think there's people that aren't loved. I think there's children that aren't loved, and maybe adults, and maybe some old people that don't feel loved anymore, don't feel important or worthy. You know what love does to us? It gives us value. It gives us worth. Doesn't it? You know the worst thing that we can have is love without respect. My mom always said that was pity. It's important to be loved because when you're loved, you know that you're worthy of love. You know that there's something within you that's valuable, a piece of you that matters. Hate is opposite of that. Hate tears us down, it destroys us. Whether people hate you for your ideas, your ideology, your theology, your political stance, or the color of your skin, or the accent that you have, hate destroys. It always has, it always will. You want to destroy a child? Don't love them. I'm not sure that hate's the absence of love, but I think it kind of is that way. Do you choose to love? Why do you love God? Why do you love God? Because he first loved you? That's a good answer. not buying it. It's a good answer. You know why you're here? You know why you're sitting here this morning? It's because you chose to love God. Plain and simple. You chose to do it. You said, God, I'm going to love you. God, I'm going to serve you. God, I'm going to do what you want me to do. God, I'm going to live the life you want me to live because I choose to love you. God chose to love you. Not because you deserve it, not because you're worthy of it, not because you have that kind of value, but because God chose to do it, plain and simple. When God chose to love you, he sent his son to die for you. He didn't have to do that. He did it because he made a decision. God could have hated you. God could have said, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to end this world as he did in the days of Noah. God could have said, there's nothing worth saving here. But God didn't say that, did he? God said, this is so valuable and these people are so valuable that I'm willing to send my own son to die on a cross for them. When Jesus Christ died on that cross, he didn't die for just Jews. And he didn't die for just Gentiles. Jesus Christ died on that cross for Romans. Jesus Christ died on that cross for Jews. Jesus Christ died on that cross for Gentiles. Jesus died on that cross for tax collectors and sinners. Anybody who would obey his call. And you and I, at times in our life, think we can sit on a throne of judgment and condemn somebody that Jesus Christ died to save. And you tell me that's right. You tell me as a Christian we can do that. What made us sit as judge and jury over the soul of another person? The soul of a man. I don't want that responsibility. Do you? What do you choose? You decide. You choose. We listen to this crud, for lack of a better word. We listen to this crud all day. If you choose to do that. I work around a lot of truck drivers, and truck drivers listen to a lot of radio, I'm telling you, like excessive amounts. And they listen to predominantly very conservative, whatever you call that. I don't listen to that stuff, so I don't know what you call it. Pods, broadcasts, I don't know, whatever it is, right? They listen to that stuff all day, and they come in and they start talking to me about it. And they start telling me all this off-the-wall stuff, and like, hold on, what are you talking about? What world, what planet did you just drive in from in that truck? Because the stuff you're telling me, I don't believe. And then I listen to some people, they listen to these very liberal things, right? And then they come in and they start telling me all this stuff. And I'm like, in the middle of this junk somewhere there's some truth, but neither one of you have it. I mean, I don't know how to tell you that. You don't have it. You don't possess it. Shut it off. Shut it off. Shut that news off for a little bit. Don't read that stuff. Don't put it in your brain for a little bit. Give yourself a break. Look outside. Look up. Look at what God created for you. Look at how much God loves you. Look around you at the people in this building who love you and who care for you, and look at your family and look at the blessings that God's placed within your life. And stop being the people that we should be ashamed of. I know it seems like I'm ranting, and I am. I am ranting. Don't get me wrong, I'm ranting. Because the stuff I see, the stuff I hear, the stuff I read. And you know what? If the world says it, I'm all right with it. I don't care what they say. I really don't. But when I see Christians doing it, it kills me to my soul. These people, nobody loved. Tax collectors, sinners, nobody likes these people. We still don't like tax collectors. I don't. I'm just being honest. I love them in a godly way, and I want them to be saved, but truth is, I don't really like their profession, right? And I think they didn't. And then Jesus came in and he said, why is he eating? Why is he associating with these people? And Jesus says, because I came to do what God would have me to do. I came to save those who need to be saved. I came to heal those who need to be healed. You and I, brethren, we can change the world. You know, I want to end with these last two, because I want to show you something here at the very end of this. I want to show you something. They're in the garden, right? Jesus is getting carried off in the garden. Y'all know this story, Malchus's ear. Getting carried off, Peter takes out the sword. Peter cuts off the ear of Malchus. Jesus looks at Peter. Peter wants that king, doesn't he? He wants that. He's ready to go to war. He's ready to go to battle. He's ready to fight till the end. Let's destroy all this. Let's set Jesus Christ on a throne, and let's make the world perfect. This world's never going to be perfect. Throwing that at you. Peter strikes off the ear. Jesus looks at Peter, and Jesus says, put that sword away. And Jesus tells him something. Jesus said, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. That's what Jesus says. Do you believe that? Jesus said, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. This Peter, I want to show you what happens when you put down your sword and you take up the cross. Because here's Peter that's ready to go to war, ready to fight, ready to die for Jesus. Isn't that what he said? I'll die with you, right? But when Peter writes 1 Peter 2, listen to what he says. Peter said, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether as a king, as a one in authority, or to governors as sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. You see, Peter laid down his sword and he took up the cross. Peter went from being that guy that was going to pull up that sword and fight those Romans and die with Jesus and put Jesus on a throne, to that guy who says, even if Rome's in power, and Rome still was in power when Peter wrote 1 Peter, the evil Roman Empire that Bill's been talking to you about, was still in power when Peter wrote 1 Peter 2. And Peter wrote that's a whole different Peter, isn't it? That's a whole different Peter. That's not the Peter who drew the sword out in the garden and struck off Malchus's ear. That's a Peter who said, such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. You know what we're called to do, brethren? We're called to do right. We're called to live right. We're called to act right. We're called to speak right. We're called to do right. And I know this world is bad, and I know this world is evil, and it's always going to be, and it always has been, and it's never going to change till Christ comes again. Just telling you. And I'm never going to change this whole world. And at the end of the day, when Rex is buried and in the dust and in the dirt, nobody's going to say, boy, that Rex sure changed the world. Never going to happen. But you know what? If somebody looks at that grave and says, he changed me, then I'm all right. Right? Why don't you change your world and quit worrying about the world? Because Jesus called us on a mission to seek and save those that were lost, whoever that may be, whatever their political ideology, whatever their color of their skin, or the language that they speak, or their ethnicity. Jesus called us to seek and to save those that were lost. And Jesus didn't not go to certain people. I just showed you. Jesus went to everybody that he could. And you and I need to do the same thing. What did Jesus do? Jesus changed the world with love. And that's the only way we'll change it the right way. If we can help you in any way, won't you let it be known while we stand and sing.